Ever wonder what your life would be like if you had, just made some different choices,
Oh, yeah.
different risks, maybe spoken, those words that you always held back.
Mm-hmm.
You're not alone if you think that way.
Yeah.
That's kind of what we're diving into today.
Mm-hmm.
Those big what-if questions and if-only ideas through a book.
Okay.
It's Kazuo Ishiguro's The Remains of the Day.
Okay. I've heard of that one.
We'll be using excerpts from the novel itself, and we're going to explore how this Butler Stevens, he's the main character. He's looking back on his life, and he's dealing with a lot of regret.
Interesting.
Yep.
What I think is so fascinating about this book is Ishiguro doesn't just tell us about Stevens's regrets.
Right.
He makes you feel them.
Yeah.
You're right there with Stevens as he's going through the English countryside, revisiting these moments from his past and having to kind of confront the choices that he made that led him to where he is.
It's true. You're really in his head the whole time. And right away at the beginning, the relationship between Stevens and Miss Kenton just grabs you.
Yeah.
She's the housekeeper at Darlington Hall. And there's this unspoken thing between them.
Yeah.
This connection they never really acted on.
Mm.
And it makes you wonder what could have been,
It's really interesting how they were both so dedicated to their jobs,
right?
to being the perfect butler and the perfect housekeeper. And I think that almost becomes a barrier between them,
I see what you mean.
to having real intimacy.
Yeah.
They were so focused on duty, on being proper,
Mm-hmm.
that I think they missed the chance to really explore something deeper.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yep.
And there's this one scene, I don't know if you remember it, where Miss Kenton just kind of lays her feelings out there.
Yeah.
It's so raw and vulnerable, and Stevens is just so wrapped up in his work that he totally misses it.
Oh, yeah.
I was cringing reading that part.
I can imagine. And that misconnection that really becomes this major source of regret for Stevens later on in his life. He keeps thinking back and wondering if things would have been different if he'd just been more open, more willing to kind of let go of that rigid control he had over everything, even his emotions.
He really built a wall around his heart, didn't he?
Yeah, he did.
And it feels like it cost him a chance at real happiness.
I think that's a good way to put it. And I think part of the reason he built those walls was because of how he defined dignity, which was influenced a lot by his father.
Oh, that's right. His dad was a butler, too.
Exactly.
And he's this towering figure in Stevens's mind.
Right.
The model of just stoic perfection.
Yeah.
Stevens remembers him handling these drunken, disrespectful guests
Oh, wow.
with just total grace and composure.
Hmm.
It's like he saw his dad's unflappable behavior as the ultimate goal, like the true essence of a dignified life.
That's interesting. And I think we should keep in mind this was a different time.
Right.
This idea of dignity, it was really rooted in the social hierarchy.
Okay.
Back then, a butler's worth was measured by how well they served a great gentleman. And that's the ideal that Stevens is trying so hard to embody.
But then here's the thing. Lord Darlington, the great gentleman Stevens, dedicates his life to.
Yeah.
Well, he turns out to be a very complicated,
Yeah.
even morally questionable kind of guy.
He really does. He gets involved with these pre-war politics, starts hosting these people who are sympathetic to fascism,
Yeah.
and then he does some pretty awful anti-Semitic things.
Yeah, that part's really hard to read. And this is where Stevens' carefully constructed world really starts to fall apart.
I agree.
He devoted his whole life to serving this man who ends up betraying the very ideals that Stevens holds so dear.
Yeah.
And as we start to see more and more cracks in Lord Darlington's character, Stevens has to face this really unsettling possibility that maybe his loyalty wasn't given to the right person.
It's true. There's this one scene that really got to me.
Which one?
When Lord Darlington tells Stevens to fire 2 Jewish maids.
Oh, yeah.
Miss Kenton is furious, of course.
Of course.
She's ready to quit over it. But Stevens, even though he's obviously uncomfortable with the whole thing, he just follows orders.
He does. It's a tough moment.
Yeah, and I think that scene really crystallizes the moral dilemma at the heart of this book.
I agree.
Stevens, he's not necessarily a bad guy,
No.
but his loyalty is so strong. His sense of duty is just so ingrained that it overpowers any moral objections he might have.
Yeah.
And that becomes another source of regret for him later on when he looks back and realizes that his devotion might have actually made him complicit in something really wrong.
It really makes you think, how do we balance our own sense of duty with our moral compass?
That's the question, isn't it?
When is it okay to question authority?
Yeah.
Even when it means going against everything you've been taught to believe?
It's true.
Yeah.
You know, Stephen's struggles are this powerful reminder to us that blind loyalty can have some pretty serious consequences.
Absolutely. And we're going to see how these questions become even more important later on as Stevens really confronts his past.
And tries to make peace with the choices he's made. You know, this idea of questioning authority and really examining those beliefs we kind of take for granted, it really comes up when you think about where this story takes place.
Yeah, Darlington Hall.
Right, Darlington Hall. This huge estate steeped in all this tradition. It's not just like a background for the story.
Yeah.
It's practically like a character itself.
I totally agree. You really get the sense that Darlington Hall is like a whole way of life.
Yeah.
That's fading away.
Right.
That the world outside is changing, and Stevens is so tied to the way things have always been done at the estate that he's having a lot of trouble adapting.
And I think that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
It's like Stevens built his whole identity around being this perfect butler in this one specific place.
Yeah.
And as that world starts to change, as that old way of doing things crumbles, he's just left feeling lost.
Yeah, and it makes those moments where he tries to cling to the past even more sad.
Like when he tells Mrs. Wakefield that he's never worked for anyone else.
Oh, right.
That little lie.
Yeah, but it's such a revealing lie.
It is. It shows how badly he wants to believe that nothing has changed.
Exactly.
Even though the world around him is totally different.
He's clinging to what's left of a world that's disappearing.
And then there's that awkward conversation with Mr. Faraday.
Oh, yeah.
When Stevens gets caught in his lie.
Uh-huh.
And he tries to justify it by comparing it to, like, not discussing previous marriages.
Oh, wow.
It's such a weird comparison.
It is.
But it shows how deeply invested he is in keeping up appearances.
Yeah.
In sticking to this code of silence.
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense anymore.
Right, and it's interesting how that clash between the old and the new, between how rigidly Stevens sticks to tradition,
right,
and how much the social landscape is changing, how those two things are clashing is really shown in his conversations with people like Mr. Harry Smith.
Ah, yes, Mr. Smith,
Right.
The outspoken working class guy.
Who believes in having strong opinions and in regular people getting involved in the big decisions that affect the country.
Exactly.
He's like the walking embodiment of all these forces,
Yeah.
challenging Stevens' whole worldview.
He really is. Mr. Smith represents this shift in power, this rise of democratic ideals that Stevens finds really unsettling.
Yeah, even threatening.
Yeah, he's so used to this rigid hierarchy, to everyone knowing their place and deferring to those in authority, that he can't even grasp this idea of regular people having a say in how things are run.
Like he sees Mr. Smith's views as this attack on everything he believes in tradition or the inherent rightness of the upper class.
It makes you wonder, though, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Is Stevens resisting all this change just to protect his own comfortable position? Or is there something deeper going on?
Yeah.
Is he afraid of losing his sense of self if the only world he's ever known falls apart?
That is a great question. And I think it gets to the heart of why Stevens struggles so much with regret.
I think so, too.
He's not just sad about a way of life disappearing.
Right.
He's sad about losing the identity he built around that way of life.
Yeah, if everything... He's always believed in his values, his definition of dignity. If none of that means anything in this new world, then who is he?
Yeah.
What's his purpose?
It makes sense that he keeps thinking about Lord Darlington.
Yeah.
Trying to justify all those years he spent in service.
Right.
Even though there's more and more evidence that Lord Darlington wasn't really who Stevens thought he was.
That's the really sad thing about Stevens, isn't it?
Yeah.
He gave his life to this ideal that turns out to be messed up, even corrupt. And the more he tries to hold on to that ideal, the more painful it gets.
And that pain is so clear
Yeah.
in that scene where Stevens is taking care of M. DuPont's hurt feet.
Oh, yeah, after that disastrous dinner party.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Remember, M. DuPont is so happy, he feels like he had this huge role in shaking what would happen to Europe.
Yeah, and Stevens is just numb.
Totally.
Yeah.
He's just going through the motions while this world-changing event is happening all around him.
It's such a stark contrast.
It is.
And it shows how empty Stevens' life really is.
Yeah, he's so focused on doing his job perfectly, on being the perfect butler, that he's missed out on all the important things in life.
Yeah, the passion, the purpose.
Right.
Feeling connected to something bigger than himself.
And then to make things even worse,
What?
he finds out his father died
Oh, right.
while he's still downstairs trying to keep everything together.
It's so sad.
It is.
Yeah.
And what's so poignant is that even in that moment of terrible loss,
Right.
Stevens can't break away from being the butler.
Yeah, he goes to see his dad, but instead of offering any real comfort, he keeps asking about what's happening downstairs if everything is in hand.
It's like he can't even process his own grief.
Right.
Like he can only feel duty.
And when his dad asks, I hope I've been a good father to you. I know. Stevens can only say these superficial things. It's a missed chance for connection.
Yeah.
For real intimacy, and it will stay with Stevens.
Yeah.
He'll realize that he let his father down in that moment. That he chose duty over love.
It's a tough realization.
And I think it might never heal.
It makes you wonder, right? What is all this dedication, all this sacrifice even worth?
Yeah.
If it stops you from being close to the people you love.
Exactly.
What does dignity even mean if it leaves you feeling empty and alone?
That's the question Stevens is wrestling with through this whole book.
Yeah.
He built his life on something that's falling apart.
Right.
And now he has to pick up the pieces and try to make sense of it all.
And as he travels through England, he has to face not only his regret over his misconnection with Miss Canton, but also the regret of spending his life serving this flawed ideal, a life that could have been so much richer. If he had just been willing to question what he believed and accept how complicated the world really is, you know, as we've been talking about Stevens' journey, all those chances he missed, I can't stop thinking about that last scene on the pier.
Oh, yeah.
It's like the whole book leads up to that moment. And it's so well written, full of symbolism and this feeling of like quiet desperation.
It really shows how a place can reflect what's going on inside a character. That twilight hour, the pier, going out into the huge sea. It all shows how Stevens is feeling like he's in between things. Between a past he can't escape and a future he's not sure about.
The pier itself, it's like a symbol for the whole emotional journey he's been on. He's literally leaving Darlington Hall behind, stepping out onto something new. A place where all the rules and hierarchies might not matter anymore.
Exactly. And it's in that space on that pier that he runs into that man sitting on the bench. Someone Stevens would normally never even talk to. Someone outside his world. But that short conversation they have, it says so much about whether Stevens can change.
When the man offers Stevens a handkerchief, it's such a small act of kindness. But for Stevens, it's this moment of letting his guard down.
It's true.
Stevens is so used to hiding his feelings.
And it's interesting that this comes from a complete stranger. Someone who doesn't know anything about Stevens or his life as a butler. It's like outside Darlington Hall, Stevens can actually connect with someone. On a real level, just as a person.
Not just as a servant. It's like he's finally letting someone see him. And letting himself be comforted by someone who just sees him as a person.
And that moment of vulnerability, that little crack in his emotional armor, it opens him up to this incredible confession.
It does.
Stevens, because the man asks him a simple question.
He
reveals his regrets, his disappointment with Lord Darlington, his fear that he wasted his life.
When he says, I trusted in his lordship's wisdom.
So sad. It shows how much he put his faith in this man.
A man who betrayed him.
And then the man on the bench gives Stevens this completely different way to look at life. He says, don't keep looking back all the time. You're bound to get depressed.
It's such simple advice.
Right?
But for Stevens, it's huge.
I love how Stevens is always overthinking everything, dwelling on the past. Analyzing every little detail.
And then you have this man with this much more practical approach. It's like he's showing Stevens a different way to be. A way that's not so weighed down by regret. More okay with life's imperfections.
And Stevens, even though he doesn't say it out loud, he seems to be listening.
And then as the lights on the pier come on, the crowd starts cheering.
Such a contrast to Stevens' quiet thoughts.
It is.
Like a reminder that life keeps moving. That joy and celebration are still possible even when you're struggling.
It's a perfect ending to the book's look at regret.
It's not a simple story about right and wrong, good and bad choices. It's about how complicated life is. How our past shapes who we are, and how we can still find meaning even after we mess up.
I feel sad for Stevens. But also hopeful.
I agree. He's carrying a lot of regret, but you can tell he might be ready for a change.
Maybe a new way of seeing the world and himself.
That's what makes Ishiguro's writing so great.
I know.
He doesn't give you easy answers or neat endings.
Yeah.
He gives you questions and ambiguity.
Right.
Which makes the book even more powerful.
This has been such a great conversation.
Yeah, I agree.
I feel like I understand the remains of the day so much better.
Me too.
And even more than that, I think I understand regret better.
It's been great talking about this with you.
You too.
Huh?
And to our listener, we hope this deep dive has made you think about your own life, your own choices, and how you deal with regret.
Thanks for listening.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive into the world of ideas.